Let's start. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello. My name is Brianna Jones, and I am the Assistant Director here at the Leadership Institute at Columbus State University. Thank you for carving out an hour of your time today to spend with us. We hope to make our time together, very interactive and engaging. So we will be utilizing the Q&A throughout. I will moderate any messages or questions that come in for the speaker. Today's speaker is Michelle Dorrell. Michelle is an advisor and coach in the advising department here at Columbus State University. She has a bachelor's from Jacksonville University and her master's in education and professional counseling from the University of West Georgia. This summer, she is finishing up a organizational coaching certificate from the University of Georgia. Michelle is currently launching her own coaching practice with a focus on helping individuals and small creative entrepreneurs adopt a growth mindset that will foster sustainable behavior change. Her areas of interest include creativity, the use of art with coaching, neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and somatic healing practices. Help me welcome Michelle in the chat. As I said, I'll jump in throughout, and with that, I'll turn it over to you, Michelle. Welcome.
All right, thank you so much. As Brianna mentioned, she's going to be moderating because I can only see my screen, and I'm sure there's lots of lovely things coming in the chat. I'm super excited to be here today. So we're going to be talking about unhelpful thinking patterns. A little bit about me, as Brianna mentioned. So I'm an advisor and coach with at-risk students here at CSU Advise, mostly working with students whose GPA is below a 2.0 and coaching them on how to get that back into good standing. I've been with CSU since 2018, so prior to working with advising, I was in residence life. I do have a master's in education and professional counseling from the University of West Georgia, and I'm currently completing an organizational coaching certificate with UGA, and this is really exciting because this is really going over this sort of idea of change, mental mindset shifts, and like how to create sustainable change in our lives, and adult development, where my undergrad and master's degree is mostly focused on college student development. So kind of getting the full picture now. So I am a wife, also a dog mom, an aspiring crazy plant lady, almost like the crazy cat ladies, but instead of cats, I want plants like everywhere. My hobbies include art, and I am a photographer and all things outdoors. So I am so excited that it's spring. I can't wait to do some hiking later in the spring. All right, well, we're just going to go ahead and jump in an overview of what we're going to cover today. So first, we're going to talk about what unhelpful thought patterns are, and then how these patterns can derail our success, are an opportunity to change our thought patterns, and then some helpful tools that you can consider so that you can make these actually work for you. So unhelpful thought patterns. Unhelpful thought patterns can be thought of as a way of thinking that leads to unfavorable feelings or behaviors. And these are often automatic. So a lot of times these sort of thought patterns are just occurring in the background in your subconscious or even in your conscious mind without you even realizing that it's happening. And we're going to go over this a little bit later and why that's the case. But sometimes we're not even really conscious, or we can't really help these unthoughtful patterns. But sometimes we're thinking perfectionist thoughts, maybe that like, I need this to be perfect, or I really want this to be better than what it is. People-pleasing thoughts, so I need to respond to the emails immediately, or it might seem like I really don't care about these things. Negative or self-critical thinking, so something like maybe I'm not good enough to be here. And then fearful thinking or catastrophic thinking is that's really when the snowball starts happening, the ruminating. One thought leads to another of like, they're going to find out that I'm a fraud, and then I'm going to get fired, and then I'm going to lose everything that I've ever worked for. And so these are not really helpful to our success as people. And I was wondering if maybe we could put in the Q&A chat just some thoughts that you have thought, or that are often thought, that might not be helpful in the workplace. Brianna can let me know what we're seeing.
Of course. While we're waiting for some of those comments to come in, I definitely relate to the I'm not good enough to be here. When you were talking about some of these unhelpful thought patterns, I automatically went to imposter syndrome and some of those feelings that unfavorable feelings that pop up when you're about to walk into, a meeting with some big higher ups or things of that nature. So I love that you brought that up. I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to as far as things that happen that are automatic feelings that we experience when we're going into a certain situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here we have somebody again who just mentioned I struggle with imposter syndrome, so majorly relating to not being good enough. I will be found out, etc. So
Yeah.
the mask will be revealed. I definitely agree with you. And then we have another comment, and it says, I have had thoughts along the lines of imposter syndrome and always getting anxious when a higher up calls or wants to meet with me. And that's from Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. Imposter syndrome is something that I feel like we all sort of experience and nobody really wants to talk about.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
They're going to find me out.
Absolutely.
And
Any
I
other?
think that's about it that came in the comments, Michelle.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll have some more opportunities to engage in dialogue. Let's go ahead and move a little bit forward here. So I just want to give you a little bit of a lens of what I'm thinking as we're going into this conversation. And so I'm really thinking about this cognitive behavioral approach, of course, that my master's is founded in counseling. So I am coming from this frame of mindset that cognitive behavioral theory really shows how our feelings, thoughts, and actions are all related. And it was developed by Dr. Aaron Beck in the 1960s, for those of you who are unfamiliar. But he's really talking about how our psychological issues are rooted in faulty or unhelpful ways of thinking and these unhelpful learned behaviors. Now, I think that the word psychological issues could probably just be thought of as like regular thinking here too, because he really goes into more about how really just our thoughts, minds, and actions are connected. So I have a little video for us to watch really quickly, and it's very brief to give you an idea of how this is all interconnected for us.
I can turn anyone into a beach bum.
There we go.
The ways in
Okay.
which we think, feel and behave are all linked. It's helpful to understand how each influences the other. For example, when I think that I can't rely on my partner for support, I might behave in ways that push my partner away and stop them from offering support. With the result that my feelings are affected. I feel unsupported, angry, and probably lonely. These feelings then influence my thoughts. I think I can't rely on my partner, and so I continue to behave in ways that stop my partner from supporting me. And so the circle rolls on, and I become more and more fed up with my relationship, more critical of my partner's attempts to help me, and increasingly hopeless about anything changing. But the good news is that because thoughts, feelings and behaviour are linked, if I want things to change, I can enter that circle at any point, and any change I make is likely to start a series of changes. So if I change my behaviour by letting my partner help me, I'm likely to feel more supported and that my needs are being noticed. And this in turn will influence my thoughts. I'm more likely to think that my partner respects me and cares for me. As the circle rolls on, my changed behaviour will show my partner that I'm turning towards them rather than away, and they'll feel needed by me and think that we're getting on better.
All right. So as we're talking about this, of course, this doesn't necessarily relate to work, but I had a hard time finding one that was work related. What I really wanted to grasp here is that there is this cyclical sort of action happening. And when we kind of get caught up in that, sometimes we're unintentionally acting in a way where we don't mean to, but it's influenced by our feelings. So we're acting in a way that's influencing our thinking and all of that sort of cycle. So I want to chat here about this. Our thoughts, this is where our thoughts and these unhelpful thinking patterns can actually derail our success. And a lot of times with coaching and things of this nature, we're working with people on areas that they are not really aware, or they're aware of their behavior, but they're not really aware of where it's coming from. So I want you to think about a time at work where you might have had an unhelpful thought, and then there was a resulting action. What was that? And then that resulting action had a resulting feeling. So if anybody feels free to share that in the Q&A chat, I would love to have some dialogue about this. Or even just, do you ever feel like you accidentally get in your own way, behave in a way that you're not really intentionally trying to do, but it just kind of happens? Curious.
Yes, ma'am. And I certainly can think of a lot of examples that come to mind. Just one is group projects. And I think that the video brought up a great point about how we choose. I mean, I think it all kind of relates to perspective. So how you choose to view and view the support, right? You know, if you just flip it in a different way and frame in a different way, I think that will relieve some of the unhelpful thoughts that you're thinking. And we do have some comments in the chat. One person said that overthinking about the past or reflecting on past mistakes. One person asked, how can we avoid perfectionists and self-critics thought? I think that Michelle will get to some strategies on how we can work through some of our perfectionist, I would say, perfectionist thoughts or self-doubting a little bit more into the presentation. And Nigel said, totally how my relationship broke down 2 months ago. Shame, is too late to fix it. So yes, I definitely agree. And I think, Nigel, again, if we would have just chose to look at it in a different perspective, I think that would have made a heck of a difference. And Adrian said, as someone with mental health issues, PTSD, I find it really hard to not bring extremely negative self-talk into my professional life, which affects my confidence at work. How we do overcome being so self-critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to touch on that one. And it kind of goes a little bit into this perfectionist thinking, and really just to highlight this. When we come to our workplace with this mindset, and we're like, we want to make sure that everybody totally feels like we are, that we're good enough at our job. But in the back of our mind, we're thinking like, I am not good enough to be here. This imposter syndrome is coming in. And so the ways that we're behaving are making sure that we're answering an email, working on the weekends, working several hours over what we need to be working, maybe trying to take control of meetings, even though we don't mean to. We just want to show that we're, worthy of being here, or not saying anything at all during meetings because we're so scared we're going to mess up. And then it might look like we're not actually engaged or that we don't care. And so, yeah, unfortunately, these thoughts, they really do play a role in how we're showing up. And then also, when we do these actions and we're getting some sort of result from that. So for example, if we are not speaking in meetings because we're so worried about messing up, and then somebody pulls us aside and says, you look like you're really not engaged, like you don't want to be here. And then that makes you feel even more bad because you're like, oh man, I wasn't intending for this to happen. And then so the cycle sort of continues. So yeah, I will definitely get into that a little bit more as we're moving through this presentation. But I really applaud you guys for being vulnerable, because this is hard stuff, and it's real things that people don't think about, but can make a big difference. Anything else in the chat for us?
Yes, I have a few more comments that have come in. You definitely struck a nerve with this conversation. So Amanda said, I recently had to help organize an event and got stuck in the cycle of thinking my partners were not going to pull their weight, which led me to feeling more stressed and annoyed. I hear you, Amanda. I recently encountered the same thing where I was going through a group project and my frame was just, I don't feel supported. Others aren't pulling their weight. And I think that kind of got me that affected how I felt about the whole process and how the project experience went. We have an anonymous comment. Yes, feeling overwhelmed by having so many tasks to complete, but then instead of working off a to-do list to complete those tasks, getting distracted by new emails coming in or other interruptions. I definitely can relate to that as well, when you're always trying to get caught up, but I just want to make sure that my email box, that my inbox is all the emails are checked off too, as well. We have another comment from Raj and Michelle. One time I was really depressed and my mom came in, hugged me for the longest time in my life, asked why I feel this way, couldn't tell her because I was ashamed of the reason. Another comment, I used to overwork so much. I have finally set that boundary, but it is really hard to maintain. And another comment has come in, Michelle, it's hard not to assume negative intent, especially with emails. What are your thoughts?
Ooh, yeah, negative intent with emails. That one is hard because written communication can be taken in a lot of ways, and we're thinking about, you know, our lens and our perspective on how we look at things. And so a person could have really sent that with no intention of like, oh, I'm rushing, like I have to rush this next meeting. I have 5 minutes to tell you what I need you to do, and there's no fluffy language in it. And you see that, and I am somebody who takes things personally sometimes, something I had to work on. So I would read that and be like, oh my gosh, like, okay, like, are you angry with me? Did I do something wrong? And so that is always hard. But I think something helpful to think about is we are always experiencing the world and whatever is going on, like, in our mind. And so, yes, somebody very well could be rude to you, but your perception of that might be amplified by something else going on around you or a past experience. And so when we think about how in control we are of our own sort of thoughts, our own sort of actions, and our perception of the world, I think it's helpful to think about it in a way that we are constantly viewing things from our own perspective. And that person may or may not have meant to send it that way. They may have, they may not have. I think dialogue really helps in that sort of regard of maybe setting expectations of like, here's kind of how I liked to be, you know, emailed when I have things that I need to do, or is there some sort of like feelings behind this? Can I fix that? Or can we work on this dialogue? So I always recommend following up with verbal dialogue if you can, if it's like really uncomfortable. If it's something that's maybe something that you can think about on your own, maybe, you know, talking to a coach. I know that Leadership Institute also has coaches available. And so there's a lot of ways that you can kind of go around that. But yeah, that was a long-winded response. I apologize. Mostly just trying to highlight here that want to keep in mind that it might be our perception of this, or it might actually be happening. So we want to think about that.
I couldn't agree with you more, Michelle. I mean, I think you brought up a valid point. When I'm having a lot of discussions with my significant others about, you know, why people react this way and things of that nature, I think the most important thing we have to remember is that we all bring our own personal experiences, which have shifted, you know, which plays a major role in how we perceive things and how we perceive communication, perceive actions. And I think that that's something that, you know, we should definitely take away from, you know, instead of reacting out of anger, just kind of considering experiences and why that was triggering for you. Same thing with the group project. I mean, my past experiences weren't great. So every little thing that they were doing, I felt, I took it, you know, I perceived it as an attack. So I definitely think that that's something that's very valid and important, Michelle. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do want to highlight here that it is our responsibility to, like, the only thing that we're really in control of is like our words and actions and kind of how we show up, right? And so we do have a wonderful opportunity to think about that, to take control of that. And I know, like, we're talking about this like it's in a vacuum. It's actually really not. It's actually really, really complicated. But this is why we have these sort of conversations and this dialogue about these thoughts, this thinking, and how it's getting in our own way, and how we're unintentionally showing up in ways that we didn't really mean to. But we do have a responsibility to fix it, and we also have the opportunity to fix it. And so the stuff that I have, like, as we're moving into, I think it's just really valuable stuff that we can think about. Because yes, it is difficult, and it is sometimes like overwhelming, and like definitely with mental health things, highly recommend seeking, you know, some additional support in whatever ways that you need that. But it is an opportunity. And so hopefully we can start moving the conversation in that direction. Is there anything else in the chat for us?
No, Michelle, you can move along.
Okay. So I do want to start here with changed behavior. So the cycle that is in that video started with changed behavior, and that led to new thoughts and actions. But my perspective is that starting with changing behavior is actually really hard and almost impossible to do. And so Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy actually wrote this book. It's called Immunity to Change. And I have it right here because I feel like I'm keeping it everywhere with me this semester. But their research is founded on this one quote. A recent study showed that when doctors tell heart patients that they will die if they don't change their habits, only 1 in 7 will be able to follow through successfully. Desire and motivation aren't enough. Even when it's literally a matter of life or death, the ability to change remains maddeningly elusive. And so they did tons of research for years about why human change is so difficult. And it's because we're trying to change our behavior, but we're not thinking about what's influencing that behavior, like our thoughts and like our feelings. And so what they found was, and I'm going to give you the spoiler alert at the end, is that it's our deep underlying belief systems that we have to work on. That is what's influencing our behaviors. So that's kind of why we're having this conversation about these thought patterns, so that we want to change our behavior. We got to start back with our thinking. The truth is that we're actually really hardwired to look at the negative because of evolution. So I have this little video to show you that kind of gives a perspective on why it's
okay. So you got a new sweater. It looks great and you're getting tons of compliments. But then just one person says something snarky about it. And even though you got all that praise, you can't help but stew over the negative comment. Why is that? Why does our mind seem to dwell on the negative?
A lot of my research focuses on how people tend to get stuck in particular ways of thinking and what enables them to get unstuck.
Allison Ledgerwood is a psychology professor at UC Davis.
I get to study how humans think and how we could maybe think better.
We all know the expression about seeing a glass as half full or half empty. It isn't just what you see, but how you see it. And the way you describe that glass to people can really change how they feel about it. Allison wanted to know what happens when you try to switch your way of thinking from the positive frame to the negative frame, or vice versa. Her research team brought 2 groups of people into the lab and told them about a new surgical procedure. Group 1 was told that the procedure has a 70% success rate. For Group 2, they framed it as a 30% failure rate.
It's the same exact procedure, and they're giving you the exact same information, but one doctor is focusing on the part of the glass that's full, and the other doctor is focusing on the part of the glass that's empty.
So, no surprise, people like the procedure when it's described in positive terms, and they don't like it when you focus on the failure rate. But then, the researchers pointed it out to the first group that you could also think of the procedure as failing 30% of the time. Suddenly, people didn't like it anymore. And when they tried a similar thing with Group 2, pointing out that the procedure had a 70% success rate, people didn't change their mind.
And over again in studies like that, we find that people seem to get stuck in the negative way of thinking about it. And it's hard for them to flip and focus on the positive.
So once you frame something negatively, it really sticks.
It makes sense from an evolutionary or functional perspective that our minds are built to look for negative information in the environment and to hold on to it once we find it.
Imagine your prehistoric ancestors. You don't want to forget that there might be a predator lurking around.
In many situations, we want our minds to be grabbed by the negative information so that we can fix problems when they're there.
But then, there are other situations where we want to get over some small imperfection or a bit of bad news when it's not helpful to fixate on the negative.
Right. So, as I mentioned, this is actually something that unfortunately is just part of our evolution, and that we are going to look for the negative. But once we know that about ourselves, there are things that we can do about it. Change is actually really possible, and this is something that I will geek out about 1,000 times over again every single day, because this single concept actually really changed my life. Once I learned about neuroplasticity, I realized how much opportunity is available for me in the way that I think, in the way that I show up, and everything else. So neuroplasticity, it really just means that our brains are malleable, almost like they're calling it plastic. So that means we're not actually hardwired the way that we think that we are. So we do have some sort of tendencies, right? Looking for the negative to make sure that we're staying safe, we're looking for our surroundings. That's just an evolutionary part of our brain that we're never going to really be able to get rid of. But the frontal cortex part of our brain, the thinking part of our brain that actually like gets us into some of the issues that we cause for ourselves, we actually can change some of that. And so the brain neurons in your brain, they're constantly firing, and then they're constantly firing in what we call wiring, or like putting together into what they call synapses or pathways of the brain and thinking. The more we think a particular thought or do that particular behavior, the pathway is reinforced. And so when you think about things like brushing our teeth, washing our face, taking a shower, those sort of things that we're just easily like thinking about doing, we don't even have to think about it anymore, driving a car. We're so used to that behavior that it's just so hardwired in our brain, we could just do it automatically. The same thing with some of our other thoughts though. So like between evolution, our societal conditioning, which is another topic that we could talk about forever, our own repetitive negative thinking, our pathways are pretty well built at this point, but it's not impossible to change it. So we want to just think about the fact that our brain is always going to go to the path that's most traveled. But as soon as we start thinking a new thought, a new way of wiring happens, and we create a new pathway. And the more we think that thought, we start building that pathway. And the less we think of the old thoughts, that pathway actually starts to die away. The same exact thing is sort of like building muscles. The same thing is happening in your brain. If you're not using that muscle, it's not going to be as strong. So if we want to be thinking in new ways, it is going to take a commitment. We're going to have to commit to thinking in a new way. But then it's like second nature. That thought is so reinforced. And I think for my personal life, I think about the way that I used to handle a lot of negative thinking, and the way that I handle it now is totally different. Like I would find even almost like I would wake up sometimes in the middle of the night worried about something I had to do the next day. And now if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm thinking automatically, it's okay, we're allowed to rest and it will be there when we get there in the morning. It was insane when it started happening because I was like, what? I'm thinking new thoughts? Like, this is crazy. But it actually happened. And I can say for myself that it was a lot of commitment to new thoughts, but it really did change the way that I see the world and the way that I'm showing up. And it's definitely possible for you. And I'm going to stop right there to check on the chat. How are we doing? Any questions?
We're doing awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. I will read some of, a thought that came in while we were watching the video. I also relate. I struggle with prioritizing tasks and people I spend my time, which highly triggers my anxiety from feeling like a failure for not meeting my unrealistic expectations. And I think that comment it goes to show what the video illustrated, how easy it is to kind of get stuck in that negative thought frame and that negative way of thinking, which makes us even more less effective as we're trying to actually work through some of these things.
Yeah, I also want to highlight quickly the end comment. The end of that comment was unrealistic expectations, that we have these expectations for ourselves that we could never ever reach, and yet we don't realize how unrealistic they are. And when we don't reach them, we're so disappointed, and it contributes to this thinking. Something that happened for me recently was, is this really my expectation of myself, or is this just something that I made up? Is this really the expectation of what I need to do at work? And I was so convinced that I was not doing enough at work, and I got my, report back, and it was like, you're doing above average, or like, you're doing extraordinary. And I was thinking, are these expectations the ones that my supervisor actually gave me? Or are they ones that I gave myself? Are they realistic? Or am I expecting myself to be some sort of superhuman that would never do these things or feel this way or never be 5 minutes late or all these things, So I think that is very telling on this like expectations that we give ourselves. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Michelle. And I do have one more comment. Nigel says, I'm always thinking about the negative, so I'm never disappointed. It's almost a safety mechanism to protect myself from harm. And let me just put the camera back on myself for a second. Michelle, Nigel is speaking my language, and it's just right on. I feel like, I need to play out the worst case scenario in my head, because that way I'm prepared if, heavens forbid, the worst case, the worst thing actually happens. But, how is that really being, my excuse is I'm being proactive, right? I'm just trying to think of the negative so that I'm prepared. But I want to know your thoughts. Do you think that's harming to the confidence level, or to how we may experience that situation, because we're thinking about the worst and catastrophizing it?
Are you asking me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was like, are you asking me or the audience? Okay. Yeah, I think, and I have a little bit about this a little bit later on, but I think this is a good point to kind of elaborate on this concept a little bit more. Is this, did it serve me at some point? Because at some point you do these behaviors because they served you. And so maybe that serving you is this, like, if I'm always prepared, then I'm never going to be in a surprise. I'm never going to be caught. Or for me, like, I like to have a million plans. So like, I will never be really that disappointed as long as like I have a backup plan and then 3 other backup plans in case that backup plan doesn't work out. And that sort of thinking has served me to get me to where I am, because I was always prepared. But I was also perpetually stressed and like chronically tired and always doing things that really didn't fulfill me or fill my bucket, but for the sake of achieving them. And so you have to think about, is this serving me in the way that I want it to serve me? Or is it not serving me anymore? Because in some ways, yes, those thoughts are always going to serve us a little bit to get us where we need to go. We just have to be able to identify where the line is between healthy and unhealthy, or like what's going to actually help me move forward. Because even though it's serving you to be prepared, it might be causing other disruptions for you. You're probably stressed out and really exhausted. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And I think that you brought up a valid point before I jump to this next question. Yes, it served you at some point. I think we often think, change isn't possible because that means we've been doing it wrong all these years. But that's not necessarily the truth. It's just that, maybe it's time for a change. Maybe it's time to reframe how we think about things. So yes, Michelle, that you definitely answer my question. We have a question from Adrian. In certain corporate environments, the standard can be way higher than humanly possible. How do we navigate that, plus the struggle of intrusive thoughts affecting our positive attempts to think differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is no mistaking the fact that like we are expected to do way more with way less, with somehow more human manpower than we don't have. It is humanly possible right now in our world. And I think that the way that I have begun to navigate this was to have that dialogue with my supervisor of like, what's actually expected of me here? What is the standard? Because if not, I'm going to give myself an unachievable standard. Like, I'm going to be so stressed out. And thinking about maybe saying like, is this realistic for me to achieve this? Or also, having that open dialogue with whoever you need to have that dialogue with, so that they can see, I'm burning myself out here. It's not possible. Is there a way that we can do this? Not that I'm not doing it. I don't want to show up and say, I'm not going to do this, but is there a way that we can do it that's more sustainable for all of our health? Is this necessary? Maybe looking at assessment data. Is everything that we're doing really required? And that's a hard conversation to have. Absolutely, especially with somebody, if your supervisor is not necessarily like the most understanding, or they don't really care, or they're just as stressed out themselves, it is a little bit difficult to have that sort of conversation. But I would say always go with your gut in terms of like, this is unhealthy for me at this point. One, how can I fix it? If I can have a different perception about it. And two, how can I advocate for myself and say, this might not be working the way that it's happening right now, or maybe I need additional training to make this easier for me. Maybe I need to advocate for, somebody to help me with these tasks, whatever that looks like. Because in some ways, being overwhelmed and exhausted is just gonna take away from the energy that it takes to change those thoughts and mindsets. So it is a tricky slope. I think Everybody's situation is very different, which is also why I recommend doing one-on-one coaching, because then somebody can help you through what that looks like. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful for you.
Thank you, Michelle. And we have a question that came in anonymously. How do we tell when those worst case scenario thoughts are no longer serving us? And do you have any suggestions on how to change that line of thinking? And if you don't mind, Michelle, I would love to answer the first part of this question.
Yeah.
Because I think that you referenced it when you talked about is this draining you? You know, is this adding to the stress? And I think once you start to experience those late night evenings where you can't sleep and you're tossing and turning, or, you know, when you're just it's making you lose confidence and making you less effective before you even get into the situation, right? I think that's when you kind of figure out or have the aha moment. Maybe having those thoughts right before this meeting or right before I embarked on this project, maybe that wasn't the best thing, because I mean, I probably spoke it into fruition, right? So I definitely want to open up the floor to you, Michelle, so that you can respond.
I think because, of course, my lens also is sort of this somatic coaching and this idea of like being able to heal in our nervous system and what that looks like. I think it takes a lot of time to get quiet with yourself. And sometimes that's not always the easiest thing to do, because we are constantly going and we have kids to take care of at home and we have this to take care of at home and we have all this stuff. But if you can find 5 minutes, even if it's like during a bathroom break or on your ride home from work, where you turn the radio off and you just breathe with yourself, if you get in touch with your body and what's going on, you will know when things are like, this is a no for me. You know, like those situations where they're like, oh yeah, this is an absolute no for me, but I'm going to pretend and I'm going to do it anyway. That's when you kind of know you're in a situation where whatever got me here is probably not serving me anymore. And sometimes it's a little bit necessary to kind of play in those situations or to like smooth things over. But then after the fact, you can think, maybe, you know, I won't do that opportunity again, or maybe I won't think that way again before a meeting, or maybe I won't let myself get into that situation again before a meeting, because I know what's gonna happen for me. So getting quiet with yourself, I would say, if you can find that, will be life-changing, because when you drop into your body will tell you everything you need to know about what the brain is going on, what's thinking, but we have to slow down enough to be able to recognize it, which is huge.
Thank you, Michelle. And what other suggestions do you have on how one can change their line of thinking and how change is possible?
So we're actually going to use this to hop into our suggestions here, because I think this is actually right where we're at. So I would say number one would be these thought ladders. So if you want to change your thinking, but we can't get from A to B on a path in the brain that's not well built, right? We can't just jump from like, I am not good enough to be here, to like, I am a valuable member of the team overnight, because that's not realistic. Our brain takes a long time to be able to build these new pathways. So what we're thinking about here is what we call a thought ladder. So your current thought goes at the bottom, and your goal thought goes at the top, and a neutral thought in the middle. And then we kind of fill in steps on how to get there. And I have an example that we can walk through really quickly together. So the current thought is, maybe I'm not good at my job, I'm not meant to be here, you know, those negative sort of thinking. And our goal thought would be, I want to show up and I want to feel like I'm a valuable member of this team, and like I'm meant to be here. And so those are very different sides of the spectrum, right? So current thought at the bottom, goal thought at the top. We're going to put in the middle a neutral thought. So like, maybe I'm capable of seeing my worth. I don't see it yet, but it's not good or bad. It's this, that I'm capable of being able to look for it. So that would be your neutral thought. But how do we get from I'm not good at my job to I'm capable of seeing my worth? There's still a jump there. So we want to be thinking things like, I'm doing the best that I can. And this might take days, it might take weeks. So what would happen here is, I'm not good at my job. As soon as we think that, oh, nope, I'm doing the best that I can, though. I'm doing the best that I can right now. Okay. And once we get comfortable with I'm doing the best that I can, maybe it's, okay, maybe I can be capable of seeing my worth at this point. And then we want to jump from being able to see my worth to I'm valuable. There has to be something in between there as well. So maybe I'm going to start looking. I can start to see what I maybe contribute to the team, why I'm valuable, what's important for me. And what's amazing about the brain is once you prime your brain to think of something, then it will look for every reason to confirm that. Your brain loves to be right. It loves to confirm it. That's why when we say things like it's going to be a bad day, we're looking for every reason why it's a bad day. And then we just kind of spin out of control. Something for me is like, I have like a very wonderful and healthy marriage, and something that I do every morning when I put on my wedding band is intentionally think, I'm very blessed to be married to my husband. I'm very blessed, like I'm very thankful for him. I'm thankful for our marriage. And then the rest of the day, my brain is primed to think of every reason that I'm really grateful for our marriage. And yeah, there are things that will come up, right, that I'm not really like super stoked about, but my brain is primed for thinking that. So if we're saying, I'm going to prime my brain to start thinking and noticing where I'm contributing to the team here. Maybe it's in a meeting saying like, oh, that was a good comment that I made, or like, I had a good idea today. That can start priming your brain to look for every reason why you're, contributing to the team. And before you know it, then you're like, I am a valuable member of this team. I am meant to be here. So thought ladders, I think, will get you there. It is, again, a commitment, but your brain loves to be right. So if you start telling it a new thought to think, it will follow. Anything in the chat about that one? I know it's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. It's definitely mind-blowing, Michelle, but no comments in the chat. But I think that you're right. If your brain loves to be right. So if you wake up and say, man, it's gonna be a long day, or man, I'm dreading this, your brain are going to look for those factual moments that happen throughout the day where you can say, oh, I was right. I knew it was gonna happen, but I don't think that serves any of us well. So, just kind of building this thought ladder, and it takes time for your brain to reroute itself. But like you said, it's not all that hard because your brain wants to be right. So the minute you kind of switch that concept and say, well, hey, things are going to go right today. And like you said about being intentional with your ring and putting it on throughout the day, you're kind of priming your brain and setting yourself up for success. And we did have something come in the comment in the Q&A. Kim said, I thought I was horrible at my job. I was ready to look for other jobs. I was not ready for the one-on-one review with my supervisor. She told me I am one of the top representatives during a review, and I was surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think a simple example when you're talking about this, like our brain can be like our brain loves to be right. When you think about like very simple terms of like maybe you're looking for a new car and you're like, man, I really want a Land Rover. And then all of a sudden, all you can see on the road are other Land Rovers, and you're like, I need that car. Like, I want that car. I think it's funny because I can relate to that in so many ways. That's a very simple example of, I think that we can probably put that into all of our lives. So like, I want this particular thing, and the next thing you know, all you see is that. Or like, I want to have a baby. Next thing, all you see is like pregnant women around you. It's because your brain is actually looking for things. And because we take in so much information every single day, our brain has to omit a bunch of stuff. And so it's going to omit anything that's not going to serve us, right? And so if we tell it that we're looking for these things, or we're looking forward to this, or, I'm ready for that vacation, all we can see are vacation ads, or, everything. We're just omitting everything else out because our brain is primed and ready for this. So if we can tell ourselves, maybe, when you think I'm not doing good at my job, and it's so funny. I actually have my little thing right here for my evaluation that says you're doing enough. And I have it right here on my desk because when I'm thinking I'm not doing enough, I'll look at it and say, well, my supervisor thinks that I am. Let's look for ways to confirm that. And so the rest of the day, I'm like, cool, I answered that email really well. I did a student meeting really well. Like, those are the kind of things that this thought ladder can really help you take that negative thinking and confirm it with evidence to that positive way of thinking. And just for the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next tool. Challenging your thoughts. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to hit on some notes here. Decatastrophizing your language by cutting out absolutes. So for me, this is something that was huge, and my counselor would say this to me all the time of like, should you do that, or do you have to do that? Or like, do you really need that? Is it always going to be like this? Are you never going to be good enough? And so she would highlight these things for me so that I could start cutting these things out of my language. It was really, really helpful, because when you say these absolutes, it puts you in a box that you can't really get out of like, I have to respond to this email as soon as I get it. I have to leave the workday with a 0 in my inbox. I will always have to work late. It's just always the case. Or I'm never gonna get that promotion that I want. When you say these things, it really puts this like absolute into motion. And then again, your brain is looking for those things. So decatastrophizing your language might help you there. And when you catch yourself in a cycle of thinking, asking yourself, like, is this serving me? And so when you catch yourself ruminating, the first few times are going to be awkward because it's like, what am I talking to myself? Like, this is kind of weird. But it's called metacognition. And so what it means is that I'm thinking about the fact that I'm thinking, which is a little bit, existential in a way, but our brains are so powerful that we actually have this concept, like this ability to do this. And so when you catch yourself in a cycle, think, wait, whoa, is this actually serving me today? Do I actually really need to think I'm bad at my job? Okay, can I let this go? Can I think a new thought on my thought ladder? Yes. Okay, we'll try that one. And sometimes it takes hundreds of times to catch yourself in those thoughts, but interrupting that thought will keep it from snowballing. So as we're talking about this idea of the pattern, right? It starts from one thing of like, oh man, I'm gonna be late to work today, to like snowballing into like, I'm getting fired. They're never gonna want me to come back here again. I'm gonna lose my house. Before we can get to that point, let's stop it at, I'm gonna be late to work today. Oh my gosh, I'm a bad employee. Stop. Is this thinking gonna help me? Is it serving me? Maybe not. So that we can interrupt that before we continue down the rest of the pathway might actually help us in building a new pathway. So as soon as we say, stop, not thinking this anymore, we're actually starting that new pathway. And the more times we follow that new pathway of interrupting ourselves, the more our brain will go there. And the more we interrupt ourselves and start thinking new thoughts, the more our brain is going to go there. And so challenging your thoughts when they come up, is this actually true? Is this serving me? Ask yourself those questions. It's possible. And then interrupting rumination with physical activity. If you really are in a point where you're like, I really can't stop ruminating, get up from your desk, move your body, go outside, take a drink of water, do what you need to do, but physically drop into your body, move around, and then interrupt that thought with also movement, because that is also going to be wiring into some new sort of ways of thinking and coping skills. And this also comes from a lot of somatic practices. When you drop into your body, it's sort of twofold, because your nervous system exists in your body. It also remembers these sort of things. So whenever you're like, I'm really anxious about this way of thinking, your stomach is in knots. I mean, like there are physiological things that are happening in your body as well. And so if we can drop into our body and address those, we can say, hey, okay, I'm going to stop this way of thinking. I'm going to get up. I'm going to stretch a little bit here. I'm going to take 10 cleansing breaths. And then all of a sudden, okay, I can breathe again. I've interrupted it with physical activity. Nervous system feels a little bit better. I feel a little bit better. I'm gonna like, okay, sit back down at my desk and start over. And so these are just some ways I think that you can start to challenge your thoughts and stop that cycle so that you can start to build a new way of thinking. All right, I'm giving you all the nuggets today. Anything in the chat about that one?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Michelle. You are full of nuggets. One person said they're drinking milk and honey here, so it is great that you're speaking the same language. I think that you kind of answered this question, but I don't want to bypass it. But tell us, is the thought ladder process more effective spoken out loud, like affirmations, or is it better to simply think to change the thought pattern?
Ooh, I'm actually not sure. I mean, there's probably a lot of research also that shows that writing it down is helpful, because you're actually like, anytime you're doing things, I like to call it's like bilateral movement in your brain, right? So like we're thinking it and then we're gonna like write about it. We're working at like different parts of our brain, so then they're gonna start to wire together. So I always recommend at least writing it down, but speaking it out loud, definitely. Dance about it if you need to, like sing about it, any sort of way that you can think about, even like art and creativity. That's another reason why I absolutely love using this sort of method, is maybe do a bullet journal or draw it out, even if you're terrible at drawing, because you're engaging different parts of your brain. They're going to speed up the process a little bit more and make it a little bit more real for you and a little bit more tangible. Also, maybe playing with clay, whatever you need to do to kind of get those thoughts out into something physical, I think is probably going to be the most helpful. But speaking, absolutely, I would recommend that too.
Thank you, Michelle. The physicality of it, I definitely have learned that through this session. You know, thought, you can't just think it. You also have to think it and try to put some movement and action with it for your brain to notice it. So thank you for that. And I don't have any other questions or comments that have come in the chat, so I'm turning it over to you.
And actually, right before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we're respecting your time, but this is called our immunity to change map. And I'm not going to go super far into this because it is powerful. Like, I'm telling you, you need this book. It's called Immunity to Change, and it actually walks you through this entire map. You can also find a ton of YouTube videos on this as well. But this map is going to start with your commitment goal, like your goal that you want. And then it's going to help you address what you're not doing or what you're doing instead of that, not how you're getting in your own way. And then competing commitments, that's hard words, what we're committing to instead of the goal, and then our big assumptions about it. So that deep underlying belief system that's really piloting the entire thing. How can we get there? And so sometimes it's, I'm not good at my job, but sometimes it's deeper than that. Like, I need to be valuable to this world. I need to do this in order to be valuable. That, when you hit that note, that's deep, and that is very existential, and that's why coaching is incredibly powerful. It's something that I learned in my classes this semester and that I will absolutely be taking into my coaching practice. But yeah, this sort of immunity to change map, getting to those deep underlying belief systems will actually help you with these thought patterns that will in turn help you with your feelings, that will in turn help you with your behavior. So all of this stuff is tied. But when you can tap into those deep underlying belief systems, when you know, because I can see in the chat, well, I'm not seeing it, but as we can see from the chat, there's a lot of thoughts about like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not valuable enough, or all of these things. So we know that we're thinking them. If we can get down deep enough to change that, then we're golden. Then we can show up as confident. We can show up how we intend to, because our thoughts have changed about it. Our values have changed. Our deep core beliefs that I am a valuable member of society. I am I am meant to be here. Those belief systems change, which change everything else. So I will get off the soapbox now. Thank you so much. And I would love to take any questions that you have.
Thank you for that, Michelle. This was wonderful. I truly appreciate you spending this time with us to lead this conversation. I think that this was the perfect time, and it was needed for everyone here. I know that one of the biggest things that I can probably take away from this webinar is just that change is possible, and that we definitely have to, sorry, something came in the chat. I lost my thought, Michelle, so I am not gonna keep us any longer. If you'll go to the next slide for me. Sorry, I'm trying to be producer and moderator.
No
It's
worries.
all in the same breath, so it threw me off a little bit, so sorry about that, y'all.
Okay. I just have one more comment. Yes. I just want to say, like, yes, this is challenging work. But the moment you start doing it, the moment that your brain is primed for like the rest of your life, and it's never too late. Like the second you start changing your beliefs that you're valuable and those sort of things, like you can actually believe that for the rest of your life, and like that your quality of life will improve. And so it's a responsibility, it is, and it's a commitment, it is, but it's so worth it. And I just hope that you guys will take some of this and like really wrestle with it and face all of those things that are really tough, and get the support you need from a coach, whether it's through the Leadership Institute or a counselor or a pastor or whoever you need. But it's possible, and it is life-changing, and I really hope for the best for you guys. So here is the last slide for you, Brianna, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Again, we truly appreciate the time that you spent with us today. Please go ahead and pull out your smartphones and take a picture of that QR code or scan it, and it'll take you directly to our survey. We would love your feedback. We also want to know if you have any additional ideas on topics or want information or want to be coached by Michelle. Just to reach out to us, you can email us at leadershipinstitute@columbusstate.edu. Please join us for our next webinar, which will be next month. It's going to be on a Tuesday, Empathy versus Sympathy, with Dr. Jackie Walton. So thank you for spending your time with us today. If you want a copy of today's presentation, a link to the recording, please drop your email address in the Q&A, and I will make sure that I send it your way. But with that being said, thank you again for spending your time with the Leadership Institute, and we hope that you continue to enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.